I want you to close your eyes for a second. Well, don't close them if you're driving, but, engage your mind's eye. Imagine you're holding a map of Morocco.
Okay.
But not a map on your phone. This is a paper map. It's yellowed, brittle, unfolded on some old wooden table. The date on the corner says 1922.
Got it.
You trace your finger south from the bustling port of Casablanca, moving down the coast towards the ancient city of Azemmour. Your finger stops at a tiny black dot, and the label reads Saint-Hubert.
Saint-Hubert. It sounds distinctly European, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Like a quiet village in Belgium, or maybe a fancy hunting lodge somewhere in rural France.
It implies a certain order, a European stamp on the landscape. But, and here's the puzzle we're unpacking today. If you were actually standing on that dusty road in 1922, wiping the grit from your goggles, and you asked a local where you were, they wouldn't have said Saint-Hubert.
Wow.
They would have looked at you, pointed to the fresh water source nearby, and told you unequivocally that you are at Bir-Jdid.
It's a classic case of cartography versus reality. The map says one thing, but the people say another.
A town with a double identity right from birth. And that tension between the name on the official paperwork and the reality on the ground, that's our starting line for today's deep dive. We are exploring the foundational years of the town of Bir-Jdid.
Right.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, small town history, why should I care? But we have this stack of archives here from the Association Bir-Jdid de la Communication et le Développement that proves this is not just a story about, zoning permits and dusty roads.
Oh, far from it. This story is actually a perfect microcosm of early 20th century Morocco. We aren't just looking at a village, we're looking at a halt, a glorified rest stop that accidentally morphed into this melting pot.
A melting pot's the perfect word for it.
Yeah, the sources reveal a story of multicultural families, a nurse who was knighted by the Sultan himself, and a French officer who started as a colonial enforcer and ended up working for the Moroccan resistance.
That officer's story is absolutely wild, and we're definitely going to get there. It's like a character arc you'd see in a movie. But let's ground ourselves first. We need to set the scene. Geographically, historically, what are we looking at in the early 1900s?
So you have to strip away the modern town you might see today. We were on the main arterial road connecting Casablanca and Azemmour. At the turn of the 20th century, this wasn't a settlement. It wasn't a town.
Just a road.
It was a transit point. The archives describe it as a meeting place, specifically for hunters and travelers.
Hence the original European name, Saint-Hubert.
Right. Saint-Hubert is the patron saint of hunters. It makes perfect sense for a French settler population that used this spot as a weekend getaway or a camping ground.
So it was a place of leisure and transit, not permanence?
Exactly. It was a halt. You stop, you rest, you maybe hunt for game in the surrounding forests, and then you move on.
But you can't build a community on transient hunters alone. You need a resource. You need gravity. And that brings us to the year 1920. The archives point to this year as the definitive turning point.
The year of the well.
It seems so simple, right? Dig a hole, find water. It sounds like the most basic thing in human history. But in this context, in this specific environment, that well is the spark.
It's the difference between a campsite and a village. In 1920, the administration dug a new well right on the main road to serve travelers, and this nascent village.
Now, we have to clarify, this wasn't the only water in the region.
No, not at all. The surrounding countryside, the douars, which are the traditional rural settlements, they have their own existing wells.
But this one was different. This one was official. New infrastructure.
Precisely. It was the new well. And in Arabic, new well translates to
Bir-Jdid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a purely practical distinction. The locals used it to differentiate the government well from the traditional ones.
And this is where that friction you mentioned comes in. The official papers, the letterheads, the military maps, they all insisted on Saint-Hubert.
But the people,
Yeah.
the truck drivers, the traders, the locals coming for water, they just said, I'm going to the new well. I'm going to Bir-Jdid.
And eventually, linguistic practicality won out over colonial branding.
It was a slow victory, though. For a long time, the town essentially had this hyphenated personality. The documents show it being referred to as Bir-Jdid Saint-Hubert.
It's a perfect metaphor for the era. The colonial administration layered on top of, but not quite erasing, the local reality.
Exactly.
So 1920 gives us the water. And water attracts people. The timeline in these documents just explodes right after the well is dug. It's like a game of SimCity on fast forward.
It really is striking how fast the infrastructure follows the resource. The well is 1920. By 1921, just 1 year later, you have a post office.
Which is a huge deal in the 1920s. A post office legitimizes a place. It puts you on the network. It means you can send money, receive orders, get news from home. You're not isolated anymore.
You're not just a coordinate, you're a destination. Then, in 1926, the first local school is founded. By 1931, they've established a boarding school for the French school.
And the notes mention that building is the ancestor of a current school, right?
Yeah, the Lycée Imam Bukhari. You can still see that historical lineage.
I love that. But let's talk about the human software running on this new hardware. A village is just empty buildings until people move in. The archives give us this really granular look at who these first settlers were.
And it wasn't just wealthy landowners or generals. The expansion in 1926 was kicked off by a man named Guillaume Chavant, who we'll talk more about in a moment. He built 4 initial houses, but look who moved in.
It's the blue-collar backbone of a society. It reads like the credits of a movie about a frontier town.
It does. The archives list a man named Buston, or Biston, the spelling varies, he was the baker. Arrives with 4 kids. You have Thibaut the mason, also with 4 kids.
Which, logically, is exactly who you need. If you're
Yeah.
going to build a town from scratch, you better bring in a mason.
And the baker feeds the mason. Then you have Fraze, the saddler essential for a roadside stop in that era, and Francesi, the blacksmith.
It's a complete self-sustaining ecosystem. Baker, mason, saddler, blacksmith. These families weren't just neighbors. They were necessary for each other's survival.
And it kept growing. By 1927, you get an entrepreneur named Ayala running transport, and in 28, a pork butcher named Espinosa.
And these names, Spanish, Italian, French, it really shows that this was a European working-class melting pot, all converging on this dusty roadside strip.
All because there was water and there was traffic.
It sounds kind of idyllic in a way, but we have to remember the context. This is the protectorate era. There is a hierarchy, and at the top of that local hierarchy was the leadership. We mentioned Guillaume Chavant, the guy who built the houses. He wasn't just a developer, was he?
No, he was a titan of this small pond. He was the president of the town's administration from 1924 to 1936. He took over from the first president, Paul Lemoyne. But Chavant is the one who really stamped his identity on the town during those boom years.
And thanks to the association, we have his backstory. And honestly, it puts that whole tough settler archetype into perspective.
He was a survivor. Born in Lyon in 1885, he came to Morocco early in 1909. That's before the protectorate was formally established. He was military cavalry 1st Regiment of Chasseurs d'Afrique.
And the records mention he was wounded in World War I.
Severely. A bullet to the shoulder, some records suggest a head wound too. So he comes back from the horrors of the Great War, probably carrying some significant trauma, and he buys this land at auction at a place called Bir-Jdid. He essentially decides to build a world he can control.
When he died in 1936, the town was even briefly renamed Bir-Jdid Chavant.
Talk about leaving a mark.
But speaking of the Chavant family, there is a detail in the records that completely disrupts the standard narrative. You know, French colonizer versus Moroccan local.
Right, the assumption is always strict segregation. But humanity is always messier than the rules.
So what happened?
Well, Guillaume had a brother, Camille Chavant. And Camille did something that might surprise people. He married a Moroccan woman named Zora bint Si Ibrahim.
And this wasn't some hidden affair.
No, it's part of the family record. And Zora wasn't just anyone. The oral history suggests she was rumored to be a Corfess from Azamor.
Wait, Corfess, can we just pause there? For listeners who might not know the term, what does being a Torfess imply in this context?
It's a lineage distinction. Corfess or Ashraf are descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. In Moroccan society, this carries immense social weight, religious respect, and status.
So let's process that. You have the brother of the French town president marrying into a family of high Moroccan religious nobility in the 1920s or 30s.
Precisely. It complicates the picture. It shows that despite the brutal power dynamics of colonialism, there were these pockets of, genuine integration, of cultural crossing. It wasn't always 2 separate worlds. Sometimes those worlds married each other.
That theme of bridging the gap seems to come up again with another key figure in the documents. We've covered the builder and the baker. Now we need the healer.
Ah, yes. The medical history of the town starts around 1929 with the civil hospital, or infirmary. But the heart of that institution wasn't a building. It was a nurse appointed in 1931 named Joseph Santanja.
The sources seem to have a real soft spot for this guy. He's described almost reverently. Why is that?
Because he possessed the most valuable skill in a divided society: communication. Santanja spoke the Moroccan dialect fluently.
That must have been a game changer. I imagine most officials needed a translator.
Huge game changer. Imagine the typical dynamic: a French doctor barking orders through a translator, creating distance, fear. Santanja could talk directly to the patients from the dwarves. He could ask, "Where does it hurt?" in their own language.
He broke down that barrier.
Exactly. He wasn't just the French nurse. He was a neighbor who understood them.
And the evidence that he was effective isn't just anecdotal. He received a very specific, very high-level honor.
This is one of my favorite details in the whole stack. In 1938, Joseph Santanja was knighted Maid Chevalier by Sultan Mohammed of Fif.
That is wild. The Sultan of Morocco honoring a French nurse in a small colonial outpost.
It speaks volumes. It shows the Moroccan throne was paying attention to who was actually helping the population. It validates Santanja's work not just as colonial duty, but as a genuine service to the Moroccan people.
And keeping with the whole small-town ecosystem vibe we have going, Joseph didn't just find professional success in Bir-Jdid.
No, the ecosystem strikes again. In 1933, he married Amy Buston.
The baker's daughter from earlier?
The baker's daughter. You see how tight-knit this community was? The mason builds the house, the baker feeds the mason, the nurse heals the baker, and then marries the baker's daughter.
It's a closed loop. Everyone's lives were entangled.
Totally.
So we've got physical needs met, water, housing, food. We've got health. But there's one more pillar mentioned in the archives: faith.
The Church of Notre Dame des Champs, Our Lady of the Fields. A fitting name for a rural parish. The construction story is interesting because it's stalled. For years, it was just a half-finished project. A shell.
So how did it finally get finished?
Woman power. The archives specifically credit Marie Therese, Guillaume Cheval's wife, along with other women in the village, for driving the project to completion in 1938.
A good reminder that while men like Cheval held the official titles, the social fabric of the town was often stitched together by the women.
Absolutely.
Okay, so up to this point, if we zoom out, we have a picture of a growing, sort of integrated, bustling roadside village. But there is one more figure in these documents who completely shifts the genre of this story. We go from SimCity to a Jean Le Carré novel.
Pierre Parent, the rebel farmer.
This guy's biography is a roller coaster. If you just looked at his resume in 1920, he looks like the ultimate establishment insider. He looks like the man.
Completely. Born in 1893, another French officer, also severely mutilated in World War I. You see a pattern of war trauma bringing these men here.
Right.
He arrives in Casablanca in 1916. He's president of the Veterans Union. He's friends with the big guns, Marshal Liaudi, the resident general himself. You couldn't get more inner circle than Pierre Parent.
And he played a massive role in the Rif War, which, for context, was the major rebellion in northern Morocco against Spanish and French rule in the 1920s.
Right. But interestingly, Parent wasn't fighting on the front lines with a gun. He led a sanitary mission to treat typhus in the Rif region. And because he was there, in the thick of it, treating people, seeing the human cost, he became the conduit for history.
What do you mean?
He was the one who physically transmitted the surrender letter from Abdelkrim, the legendary leader of the Rif resistance, to the French authorities.
He's literally carrying the weight of the war in his pocket. So he sees the war, he sees the politics, he knows the key players, but then something snaps.
The sources say he became disabused. He looked at the protectorate system, the land grabs, the corruption, the inequality, and he couldn't reconcile it with his conscience. He saw how the sausage was made, and he hated it.
So what does a high-ranking officer do when he realizes he's working for a system he no longer believes in?
He walks away. In 1937, Pierre Parent quits the administration. He leaves the halls of power, leaves the side of the generals, and moves to Bir-Jdid to become a simple farmer.
That is a drastic lifestyle change. He goes from negotiating with rebels to checking on his crops. But he didn't just grow tomatoes and stay quiet, did he?
A man like that can't stay quiet. When World War II breaks out, Parent joins the resistance against the Nazis and the Vichy regime. He's in Algiers, working the networks, fighting for the liberation of France.
But his definition of liberty had expanded.
That's the key. He didn't just want liberty for France, he wanted it for Morocco too.
And this is where his story really lands in the history books.
Yes, because after the war, he doesn't go back to being a colonial administrator. He ends up becoming a member of the first National Constituent Assembly of Morocco.
Wait, the Moroccan Assembly? A former French officer?
Yes, helping to shape the future of an independent Morocco. In 1955, he published a book called La Vérité sur le Maroc, The Truth About Morocco.
Which I assume was not a flattering portrait of French rule.
It was a searing critique. He spilled the tea, as you might say. He documented everything. The archives describe him as a singular figure. Military man, farmer, humanist, critic. He lived in Bir-Jdid, farmed that dusty soil, but his mind was wrestling with the biggest questions of the 20th century.
It is absolutely wild to me that all these lives intersected at this one specific coordinate. Think about the conversations at the cafe. You've got the baker trying to feed his kids. You've got Shavant, the town boss, whose brother is married to Moroccan nobility.
You've got the nurse who speaks the dialect and wears a medal from the Sultan.
And down the road, you've got this disillusioned officer basically plotting the end of the very empire they're all a part of.
It really redefines what a small town is. We started this deep dive looking at a map and laughing about a name change. But Bir-Jdid versus St. Hubert isn't just trivia, it's the central tension of the place. It's the story of a new way of living together being figured out in real time.
And that's the power of these local archives. If you look at the big history of Morocco, you see treaties and wars. But if you look at Bir-Jdid, you see how those massive forces actually played out in the lives of real people. You see the friction, sure, but you also see the accommodation.
And the preservation of these names, Buston, Francesi, Sant'Anja, Parent, is so vital. It's what we call collective memory. Without the association saving these records, Pierre Parent is just a footnote. With them, he's a human being who made a difficult moral choice.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. We all drive through small towns. We see a water tower, a post office, maybe a crumbling old school. We assume nothing much happened there. But if a simple rest stop like Bir-Jdid can hide the story of a rebel officer, a royal knighted nurse, and a cross-cultural dynasty, what stories are hiding in the foundations of the town next to yours?
That is a question worth pulling over for.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you on the next road trip.